Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis. We're on top of page, the end of the paragraph on page 1192. And what we finished here was the explanation in B'Shamayim Mimal. That's referring to the Eir HaBligvul, the infinite light, in contrast to Ala Oretz Mitochas, which is referring to the finite, divine finite light, which permeates and enters into existence. So in both cases, we're talking about V'yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha, being aware and cognizant and recognizing and feeling how Havaya Hu Elikim, that though there was a Tzimtzum Elikim, it's revealing the Havaya Hu Elikim. That's really Havaya is within the Elikim. The Elikim also is obviously a divine name, but it's concealment on its own. And the Havaya Elikim is B'Shamayim Mimal, that we see the Bligvul, that was concealed, the first impact of the Tzimtzum, and Va'oretz Mitachas, the second impact of the Tzimtzum. Both are being reversed and transformed by revealing the divine within existence and the divine beyond existence, the transcendent energy and the immanent energy. That's briefly what we learned. And Havaya Elikim is the two times, Havaya Hu Elikim, one in Mishamayim Mimal, one out of Oretz Mitachas, one is Havaya de Le'ela, and he doesn't explicitly say that the second one, the lower one, is Havaya de L'Tata, but he does say it later in the Hemshech Havaya and Beis, so it's correct that it's Havaya de L'Tata, the lower level of Havaya. So it's Havaya that relates to the Elikim of that basically the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra would be the lower level, Oretz Mitachas, and the Ayin of the Yesh HaMit would be the higher level. Okay, and we also discussed the advantage. What is the advantage of knowing both, the Yadaita Ayin v'Shavesa levavecha, both levels of awareness? Because though the divine in measure, in the Kav, in the Pnimius HaKav, has an element that is really a combination of measure and beyond measure, so it's reflective more and more similar to Atzmus, that is beyond definition. Yet, in a revealed way, in the pure magnitude level, the pure firepower of revealed Ein Sof is in the Eir HaBligvul, being that it has no measure, and all the other qualities he addressed. And the final one that he mentioned here that we learned yesterday, that the Eir HaGvul, even the Pnimius HaKav, is only in Pnimius HaElemus. It's restricted, so to speak. It has a defined place. It's not everywhere in a revealed way. But the Eir Makif, on the other hand, affects everything. It surrounds and impacts everything. And I discussed that yesterday, what that means. Example I gave from Simchas Torah, and there are other examples as well. So if you really sum up the advantages of the Eir HaBligvul over Eir HaGvul, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that he mentions. Number one is that it's about expressing the Atzmus, and not the Eir that relates to existence. In other words, its focus is on Atzmus, not the focus on existence. That's we're talking now Chassidus ha'Eir Pnimi. Second thing is the Eir Pnimi is midah v'gvul, it's measured and defined. The third thing is also concealment. Even when you reveal it, it's still affected by the Tzimtzum. Whereas the Eir HaBligvul is affected by the Tzimtzum, but the Eir itself is not diminished. It just recedes. And the Eir is a Bligvul Eir. So there's 3. The fourth thing is that it reflects the next thing is, even compared to the Pnimius HaKav, it reveals the divine Ein Sof in a revealed way. So even though the Pnimius HaKav is also Eir Atzmi, a Medida Atzmis, also reflective of God's inner intention, but still it's the intention as it surrounds Medida, measure. Whereas the Ein Sof is Ein Sof Begoli, as we discussed. And finally, the fifth point, which is the last two are around the Pnimius HaKav, the advantage it has over the Pnimius HaKav, that it's B'kol Malkim B'Shava, not just to Neshamas Yisrael or the Pnimius of Eses Sfiris. The Eir HaMakif affects everything, even though it's not revealed yet. But remember, we're pointing here is that we are revealing it. We're reversing the Tzimtzum, we're transforming the Tzimtzum. Whereas the transforming of the Tzimtzum around Eir Pnimi, even when it's revealed, it's still Eir Pnimi. and therefore has a very defined place in the context of primus elemus. Okay, even when it's revealed, good. Fine. One more point I want to make, which just ties things together. You may recall, and it was mentioned yesterday by someone, that back on let me tell you what page I'm referring to. Where was it? No. When he went back to Birurim, page 1179 and 1180. So the Rebbe Rashab there explained that the three levels that we discussed much earlier in Shabbos, the Friday night meal, the Shabbos day, and Shabbos afternoon, as being three levels, with the first one being Das Tachten, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, that after a week of work, of Birurim, we're now concluding that work. And what does that consist of? Revealing the Ayin, the divine within existence. So he talks about that. Okay. Which he calls there Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai. That was the lower level of Havaya Elakim. Shiluv Havaya Ba'adnai. Then he went to Shiluv Adnai Ba'avaya. And now he's talking about going, one second. The bitl of the oyer that's higher than the keli. And he called that the mile of bitl. And that's a bir of eichel metech eichel. That's in holiness itself, you're going up a higher level. Not the refinement of the material world, but rather within the eichel metech eichel. Okay. And that he called the bitl of re'usa deliba, which is l'mayla metam v'das, super rational, the desire of the heart. And that, he said, was a level that we called bitl of chachma shebenefesh, shiluv adnei ba'avaya, yechudei elah. So we have right here already, in the pnimi itself, you have two levels. You have the level of finding the divine within existence, and now finding the divine that's higher than the Kalim, which he calls Das Elyon. But nevertheless, this is Das Elyon of Atzilus. So remember, I mentioned quite a few times that the Rebbe Rashab on page 11, let me just see. The bottom of page 1149, he said, Kan HaKavona, speaking the Ayin, is an Er Pnimi. So there's the two levels in Er Pnimi. One is the Er Pnimi as it enters into existence. You could call the Chetzenius HaKav, the Chetzenius HaEr. And then there's the Pnimius HaEr, the Pnimius HaKav, which is higher, is the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. And this is explicitly stated on page 1169 and 1170. So going back to 1179 and 1180, so we have the two levels. But then he says, then he says like this, Ach, amitis inyan das elyon. True das elyon is even higher than that. What's true das elyon? Tachas idea shalei neda. So this is completely connected to the etzem haneshama, that's completely beyond even recognition. Tachlis inyan hadas v'yadaita hulahakidus ensur shalei neda musu klal, and it's not even asogas hashlila. He says clearly, "Mein gam hashlei bo b'chinas asogas shlo." That's etzem hanefesh. Very similar, and to what we're learning here now. 3 levels. What are the 3 levels? Chitzenius ha'er, Pnimius ha'kav, Pnimius ha'er, and the er habligvul. The only thing is that here he's talking about, the 3 levels. The only thing is that when he talks here about that the er ha-pnimius ha'er has in it the quality of an atzmius, in some ways more than the er habligvul. But the er habligvul has something greater because it's beyond everything. It's completely infinite, meaning in comparison to the finite structure of existence, and even the primis hakavona of the finite structure. So then when he says there that, he says, this is his kashus atzmi of the neshama, gam lebchinas haflo de ein sof. In other words, what he said there is that there's naran, chaya, and yechida. And that he calls das elyon amiti. Only thing is that it's not completely correct, because if you look at the bottom of page 1180, he's amitis hayidiyah de das alien. He says it's primius hakav, not the way I just said it. So first, initially, I thought that you can say these are the 3 levels, but in truth, it appears that all 3 levels there are all in primius ha'er, pnimi. There's the outer dimension of the pnimi. There's an inner dimension, but then there's primius hakav. And he says that is the highest level that touches atzmius. So he doesn't even mention bli gvul. Okay, so it was an interesting thought experiment, but it's not completely accurate, because there he clearly says that the birur, in other words, the first ayin of the yesh hanivra is even lower. It's not even the kav, it's the way the air enters into existence, a reflection of the kav. Then Atzilus is a reflection of the kav, and then there's the primius hakav. Those are the 3 levels there. But you do see 3. In that sense, you do see 3. And it's consistent with what the Rebbe Rashab has been teaching, er primi. But here, where we are now, he definitely speaks about er habligvul, which is definitely not er primi. There's a clear er makif and er habligvul. So there he is somewhat introducing the other interpretations in the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti, referring to the Er HaBligvul. Because there is an interpretation like that the Er HaGvul is the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, and the Er HaBligvul is the Ayin of the Yesh Hamiti. But the fact is that we find in all levels, all 3 aspects, all 3 dimensions. So I just wanted to round it out by sharing that. Okay.
What's the difference between the pnimius of the kav and the or pnimi? Was there something you just said?
Kav and or pnimi is the same thing, and there's the pnimius of or pnimi, and there's the chitzenius of the or pnimi. As I explained, the function of it, like the paintbrush, making the details, and its inner intention.
Yes, thank you.
Is the effect of the or the makif, is that less, that have less permanent impact than the effect of the orpinimi? The das elyon or the orpinimi, is that more of a long-term effect?
Over what? What are you comparing to?
Over the das elyon or the or makif, or a soviet. In other words, generally speaking, or makif comes and goes. Or Pinimi, you've bought it, you own it. Is that the same here?
If Yadaita Ayin v'shel vesel of avecha is referring to Pinimi, then it depends on your avodah. If Yadaita Ayin v'shel vesel of avecha is including er habligvul, and your avodah is that you're becoming aware of this level, then the avodah makes it whether it remains or doesn't remain. There's no magic trick here. It all comes down to your avodah.
Gotcha.
The point is that we're trying to be aware of all levels here. Right now, both the as he said, both in Havayu Elikim Telatata and Havayu Elikim Dele'ela. And once you make it yours, that you are aware in a level of das, remember, das is internalizing, personalizing, penetrating. And Hashavesel of Avecha, then that becomes part of your permanent fixture.
So then what would be the difference in impact on the person?
That we'll have to go back to volume 1, where he discusses at length the difference between how a makif affects us and how a pnimi affects us. A pnimi is internalized. A makif is like faith, b'siras nefesh. It elevates us. It's more of a bittul that it creates. Pnimi is more internalized. It's the first time you're hearing the difference how pnimi and makif affect us. It's a central theme we've talked about who knows how long. Basically, the difference between Amunah and Das.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Amunah and Tam V'das. There's a makif is necessary, but Pnimi internalizes. Each has its quality that the other doesn't have. All of Torah is based on Pnimi and makif.
In other words, the effect of the Pnimi is that the intellect of the person would, so to speak, be a vessel for higher than intellect.
I don't know. I don't want to go into that right now because the Rebbe Rashab is not discussing it. So I'm not going to discuss it either. You can go back to page 1179, where he talks about them all in the Pnimi context. Tam V'das, Re'usa Deliba, and like Etzem. That's what he talks about there. And there he talks it all in the context of Pnimi. And as far as Bligvul goes, you have to go back to volume 1, where he talks about the effects of Bligvul on Makif.
Okay. There's still
whether it's a matter of bittul or siras nefesh and so on.
Gotcha. And that, I was wondering, like we mentioned, by the levels by difference between the meichin of tzitzit, meichin with the tefillin, what happens by Kriya Shema. It sounds like there's this step-by-step growth, and that's
correct. And there he actually says that's in makif of mitzvahs. That was the point where he wanted to say that the mitzvahs, which is Ratzon Elyon, comes down below, and there's two aspects to it. There's the makif in general, that you're bringing Ratzon Elyon, God's will, and there's the makif as it affects specific details.
That's still makif, affecting the Pnimi. That's not
anyway.
The
Hemshech Chaim Beis,
okay.
the 1192 pages is very much all around makif and Pnimi. If you recall, in volume 1 at length, he discussed the levels in Pnimi, the 3 meanings in Sphira, the 3 meanings in Keser. So you really, now, I don't want to go now in a review of that because it's not what we're learning right now. That's a general overview. It's not the discussion right here.
Okay,
But
just to clarify one point.
What can I say is that when he brings the Ur HaBligvul here, he wants to explain the Shemayim Mimal on a deeper level. Remember, there's the first interpretation in the previous man. So that's where there's a connection, because once you're bringing in the infinite energy, and you see, he doesn't even focus really necessarily, I mean, he says a few places, makif, but his main focus is on Bligvul more than on makif per se. So the Bligvul, generally speaking, suffice it to say, Bligvul impacts existence, like in the Maimarim of Shavuos Ayin Gimel in volume 1, on creating an utter bittul, a bittul b'mitzias, where Pnimi, the focus is on transforming the existent entity. Like we learned, the lower level is the birurim, and even the higher level is still medida. It's still about the definitions of existence. It's the esesphiris, the primius of them, primius hakav. Whereas the Ur HaBligvul is not the kav; it's beyond the kav. Okay.
So we're called, but nevertheless, the mitzvos.
I'm going to have to say this, since there's other people in this class.
Okay.
I don't want this to become a conversation between you and I.
Right.
If everybody wants to go, this is really not in the subject at all. You know, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't think now is the place. I said, I think enough. You want clarity, you have to talk, either review it, or you could ask me at another time.
All right, good, fine, thank
you. Okay. Now we have to do another review, because the Rebbe Rashab is tying together many knots, many different subjects. So now he's going to go back again to another third level. That's why I brought it here, this third level. If you remember, I'm going back now to Maimer Bamidbar Sinai Ba'oil Moed, which he's going to now discuss in the next paragraph here. But I have to refresh us all of what is said there. So I'm just going to give a short overview of, after discussing, let me just go where it is. The Maimer is, if you want to see the actual Maimer, is Bamidbar Sinai. Let's see, it's not Atam Nitzavim. Okay. Yeah. It's the Maimer Bamidbar. Let me get the page number. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, the Maimer begins on page 1085. No, 985. Page 985, Tuf Tuf Kuf Behei is the Maimer that I'm gonna review now for a moment, a few key points. So if you look on page 987, and you'll be familiar with some of the subject matter here, he says the following. 987, the beginning of the paragraph. Just 1 second. Okay. So remember, we just a few pages back, we learned that the Tzimtzum has 2 impacts, right? One on the Eir HaBligvul, where it conceals it. And one on the Eir HaGvul, where it measures it and defines it to be able to enter into the kelim, to the containers, and to the structure. So that's a discussion back in the Maimer, the Pesach Maimer, Vayhi Ha'onon. Look on page 1190. So on page Vayhi Ha'onon. And then he discussed Havayu Elikim, the transformation of each of these 2 impacts of the Tzimtzum. Now, on page 987, if you look, it says, B'chol Hanal Yuvan, the Inyan had Tzimtzum who Beis in Yanim. Lahayel Mes Eren Sof HaBligvul, and Beis by Er Shenimshach by Elamis. The same theme we just finished learning right now. But there, then he continues, after he discusses that, he says, he talks about the transformation then of both aspects, both components of this Tzimtzum. And if you look at the bottom of that page, look at bottom of 987. What does he say? V'zeu ma shenemar b'parshat Hashena d'Krishma havaya lekenu havaya. Basically, havaya lekenu havaya echad. Twice mentions havaya. What's the twice? She says, Beis shemas havaya v'shem elikim be'emtza. Shema Yisrael, Hashem, havaya, elikenu, havaya, echad. So it's elikenu sandwiched between 2 havayas. So he says, Shem elikim is Tzimtzum. Top of page 988. I'm not going to go into all the details. What are the 2 levels of havaya? He says, these are the Shem Havaya of Eir Sof. The 2 levels of Havaya he's going to say is Eir HaBligvul and Eir HaGvul. Like we said here, the 2 levels of Havaya Elikim. Goes on to explain it. I'm not going to go through it all right now. It's not really relevant. Okay. Then he says that Tzimtzum Ba'Beis Madregas, and that's Shem Elikim, Anemer Be'emtza, and then Havaya Elikim, Chinas Eir Sof, Havaya Elikim Ba'Eir Shabbat B'Mitzvah V'Gvul. So the first Havaya is the Eir HaBligvul, the second is Eir HaGvul. Exactly as we learned it here. Now, then he goes on to even talk about Das Alin and Das Tachten. It's all relevant to our discussion. But the main thing I want to go to is I want to jump a little further. And it's actually very relevant to the context. If you want to know the difference between the Tzimtzum in the Eir HaBligvul, the Tzimtzum, the Eir HaGvul, like I mentioned, the Tzimtzum does not affect the Eir HaBligvul per se, because the Eir HaBligvul just recedes. Like the teacher that conceals his infinite wisdom, the infinite wisdom is not impacted by the Tzimtzum from the point of view of the teacher. Only from the point of view of the student is it concealed. The Eir HaGvul is impacted on both of them, because the Eir HaGvul is going through a particular stream of consciousness that the teacher is now limiting the flow as he teaches to the student, as he discusses there at length. But then he continues talking about the transformation of the Tzimtzum, okay? And this is where I want to lead you to, till the end of the Maimer. End of the Maimer, he starts in page 992. because this is not what he's going to refer to where we are now. He says, this subject matter that we transform, the tzimtzum, darkness to light, and bitterness to sweet, that's what he discusses there. Okay? He says this is what it says, Kener mitzvah v'teira'er v'derech chayim teichachas musar. So the pasuk refers to three things. Ner mitzvah, the candle of a mitzvah, the light of Torah, and derech chayim teichachas musar, the path of life, teichachas musar, which is essentially, teichacha means rebuke, the way of life that you need the discipline. And that's a third path, a third element in the verse. So you have Torah, mitzvah, Torah, and essentially tshuva, as he explains. So he goes on to say the mitzvah is ne'er v'keli. Torah is that goes into the kelim. So mitzvah is the keli, the container. Torah is the That's Shem Adnai and Shem Havaya. The derech chayim is the derech umovid l'chaim al yanim, the way to reach higher than Eris and Kalim, higher than Ishtalshalus, which is higher than Torah. And he goes on to explain that more in detail. I just want to refute a few points before we continue here. I want to bring it back to this theme. So what does he say? That so through what he calls there teichachas musa, basically receiving affliction ba'ava, the kalbi yisurim ba'ava, because he knows it's about refinement. In other words, it's coming through a negative, perhaps, experience, but it's coming from refinement. That comes from a higher level than even Torah itself. That's what he says there. I just want to jump a bit, because not everything is relevant here. Okay, and he calls it later on page 993, Shem Havaya in Atzmus. So you have Havaya de la Tata, Havaya de la Ela, and then Shem Havaya de Atzmus, Sheba Atzmus. Okay. Then after that comes the next mimer, where he goes into the discussion that he begins v'yadaita hayom. It follows straight from v'yadaita hayom. Why am I mentioning it? Because now when we go back to where we are learning, we could see the flow. After this, what we just discussed, this derech chayim, ner mitzvah v'tereh, and derech chayim terchachas musar, then begins to understand all this. Let's discuss v'yadaita hayom v'shavesa levavecha. And he asked all the questions and explained v'yadaita hayom is mamata l'mayla, hayom, and then went through all the verse, v'yadaita and levavecha, v'ayavelikim b'shamayim mal v'arotz b'tachas that we just finished. So now the Rebbe Rashab is connecting basically v'yadaita hayom that begins in the Shavuos Maimer with a Maimer preceding it that talks about the transformation of the tzimtzum on all levels. And he uses the verse, Ner mitzvah v'teira'er v'derech chayim terchachas musar. That's what I wanted to bring together here. So now let's continue reading inside. And you'll see how it all ties together. V'hinei, the new paragraph on page 1192, which we're starting now, which if you want to see the text, go to ayinbeis.com. So it says, V'hinei, b'chdei lahamshe b'chinas eirei ein sof habligvul, in order to draw down the infinite light, remember, Shamayim Emal, Havaya de Le'ela. This Bar Le'il, it was explained earlier, Dibra Maskil Bamidbar Sina Ba'el Moed, the Maimer I just now reviewed briefly. What was explained? Shazeh Ayin v'derech chayim techachas musar. That's the inyan of Derech Chaim, that the path of true life is Techachas Musa, is when you are let's call it audited, if you wish. Techachas Musa is essentially when you are rebuked for behavior that's not appropriate, which is even higher than mitzvah and Torah, like we just discussed. So again, the page is 993, I believe, right? 992 rather. So that's what he's referring to. Derech Chaim, he says, Hu shalamayla mener mitzvah v'teireh, because that's what the pasuk in Mishlei is referring to. First, it says the candle of a mitzvah. It's a candle. Light is stronger than a candle. Candle is like the keli, as I mentioned, the container. Mitzvah, and then comes the Derech Chaim. So this Derech Chaim is higher than the level of ner mitzvah and teireh. V'hu b'chinas shem havaya de le'ela shelamayla m'shem havaya de teireh mitzvahs. So Torah mitzvahs has a Shem Havaya. We have Shem Havaya everywhere, as we know. And this is referring to Derech Chaim Techachas Musa, the third path, the path of life, is higher than the Havaya in Torah mitzvahs. And that's how you draw down the Erein Sof HaBlikvul. V'amshochi al-yedei Techachas Musa, hainu al-yedei she'odam miyaser es atzmei. And the way you draw down is through rebuke, through reprimanding, which means through a person. Miyaser means literally afflicting or punishing or in some way oppressing himself. So obviously we know the Beshit of the Baal Shem Tov is not to in any way, is not sigufim and in any way self-afflictions, but nevertheless, there's a level of Aveda where a person is refraining and limiting themselves. Like he says in Tanya, when you tell the Nefesh Habamis and you yell at it, or you are in some way rebuking your own negative side. So this essentially
that's Musa. That's like Musa, right?
Yeah. That means Techachas Musa. Techachas Musa. Techacha, we say Techacha is essentially the delivery of words of rebuke or condemnation. So in other words, okay. So that's the way you be mamshel the er habligvul. Okay, well, it's interesting what he's saying now, because till now we didn't talk about this. Till now we're discussing that mitzvahs, Torah and mitzvahs in this world refines the world and draws down all these energies all the way to Shemayim Imal, Oretz Mitachas, on every possible level. But now he's introducing this. So let's see what he's going to say now. This is, of course, connected to Eliyahu Hanavi, the second Beis Pomim Havayu Elikim. Because remember, we never explained why Taka by Eliyahu is twice and by Matan Torah only once. Anochi Hashem Elikecha. So he's going to say, Ubira Inyanhu. The explanation of this goes like this. Dihine Gabe Eliyahu Ksiv. By Eliyahu it says, Vayirapa es Mizbeach Hashem Ahorus. Okay, so the story there is that the people and the king, I think as well, they defiled and they essentially the Mizbeach with Avodah Zarah, with idolatry. So Mizbeach HaHorus, Horus means something is destroyed or defiled or in some way compromised. So Eliyahu, it says, came and he healed. They healed.
Destroyed it.
What?
The Elilim destroyed. They destroyed the Mizbeach. They didn't serve Hashem.
Yeah. They actually destroyed it, or they were makriv?
Maybe, I don't know. Maybe they destroyed it also. They were makriv on their own Mizbechois.
Yeah. Okay, well, a horus means destroyed, hirus.
Yeah.
So the irapa is that he healed it, he revived it, he brought it back to life, basically. That's the expression. The Isa B'Yalkut, Bim Keme, and the Medrash Yalkut Shmeni, most likely, on the verse. This is probably in Melachim, right?
Yeah.
So what does the Yalkut, the Medrash say? Sheripa Isam, he healed them. V'hevion mederech ra l'derech teva. And he brought them from an evil path to a good path. How? Ayidei she'aseh nisim, through the miracles that he performed. So when Eliyahu came and saw this desecration, so he performed some miracles that the Psukim talk about, and that aroused and awakened the Eden to change from the bad path, derech ra, from their evil ways, to a good path, derech teva. That's the Lashon HaMedrash. The Kiva Shiro came, and since the Jews saw what Eliyahu did, the miracles, that's when they said, Amru Havayu Elikim. That's when they declared, Havayahu Elikim. That God, Havayu Elikim. So that's the context. Hari Mefarish. So Rebbe Rashab is now going to explain this. That means he's Mefarish, the Malchus is explaining, V'yarapa Loshen Refuah. That he's using. Why does the pasuk use the word Yerapa? Yerapa goes on when there's an illness, you heal it. Here there was a desecration. Here was a destruction, a defilement. But nevertheless, he's explaining the Yerapa of Lashon Refuah, from the word of healing. The tzarich lahavan lefizeh, maza shayich lamizbeach. What kind of healing is connected to the altar, to a mizbeach? As I said, healing is fitting when a person, let's say, is struck with leprosy or struck with some other illness or disease. So Mesha came, or whatever the Psukim talk about, the different ways they were healed. But what is it connected to Mizbeach HaHarus, a destroyed or defiled altar? Acha inyan hu. The inyan of this is, the Mizbeach hu b'chinas Malchus. Mizbeach is the level of Malchus. Just keep that in mind. It's a level of Malchus. A permanent flame shall burn and burned on the Mizbeach. In other words, it was always, an eternal flame was always lit there. Tukar is from the word flame, torch, burning on the Mizbeach. What is that referring to? If the Mizbeach is Malchus, what's the eternal flame, the Eish Tamid? Heim b'chinas hey gvura is the Malchus. Remember, fire is always connected to gvura. Chesed is mayim, water. Fire is gvura. These intense fires that were always burning are the hey gvuras, the Malchus.
Why is Mizbeach Malchus?
Generally, the reason is because the Mizbeach is talking about the Mizbeach HaChitzin. So, Kodesh is the three kalim there. The shulchan, the memneira, and the mizbeach is chesed, gvura, teferes, because it's befnim. The mizbeach hakteres is befnim. The el mayed, the next section, where the mizbeach hachitzin stood, is already as the spheres of Atzilus are connecting yeredes libiyah, raglel yeredes. So it's referring, the mizbeach hachitzin takes a behema, which is the gashmis of this world, and it's an interface between the Beis Hamikdash, or the Mishkan, and the world. The Mizbeach HaKteris is an internal activity. That's why it's not, there's no blood, it's incense, it's pure Avodah. It's not about Birurim. And the Mizbeach HaChitzin is essentially the level of Malchus, which is the last sphere of Atzilus, and it's Yeredes, and connects to Ban, or Behema, which is Biyah. That's the general reason why Mizbeach is Malchus. It's like the place where it connects. The fire on the Mizbeach is the Hey Gvuris. But what is that? This is all Kabbalistic language. Now he's going to explain what does it mean in Aveda. In Aveda, he says like this: the Malchus. This is the yearning and the thirst. You can say the Rotze, the yearning and the Tshuka and the pining for of Malchus. That Malchus, which is going downward, yearns to connect to Elikus, to godliness. That's referring to Malchus Kovid, that Kovid is that the level of Malchus is always Yizamrecha singing song, and it's not silent. Why? Because it's calling upward. It's call and yearning, like he says, Nehura Tata Karid Tadir L'Nehura Ilah. So the lower waters, Nehura could be water and it could be light.
Nehira is light.
Sometimes it says, I think it says the Mayim Tachtein in Beichin, and they connected, I think, to Nehira Tata.
Yeah.
So it may be Nehira is from the word nod. No, it's Nehira is Eyr, but okay. Bottom line is the lower light is always crying, is always calling to the higher one. How is that? The Lamay is Amrecha Kovid V'Layidim.
It's a Melcha Kovid V'Layidim. It's Rotzai.
Yeah, it's always calling V'Layidim, and it's not silent. So this is Malchus's thirst to connect to the divine. Why is it thirsty? Because remember, Malchus lesla magarma klum. It doesn't have anything of its own. It's like the moon, and its role is to bring down godliness into existence. But it's also connected to the source, so it's always yearning to seek upward. And he brings another raya. So it says, by after Chetei Tzadas, what does it say? There it's a curse, a punishment, but it also has a positive side, that you will always have tshuka. It's talking to the feminine, to Malchus. You have always a tshuka to your husband, to Zah. So basically, Malchus will always be yearning to connect to its higher counterpart. Don't take this literally in context of husband and wife. You're equals. But in Ruchnius, there's an element of Malchus, the Makabel, like the sun and the moon seeking to connect to the sun. And the word shukah is used.
Why are you saying they're equals? Torah says we have to, woman has to be satisfied. It never says the man has to be satisfied. Just remember.
Well, mechabed ishta yesem agufay. Let's remember that. Honor your wife more than yourself, more than your body. So what level is this? This is the level Hi B'chinas Eish Hashem. So Isha here is Malchus. It's made up of two letters, two words. Eish Hashem. That's B'chinas Malchus. Shukosa L'B'chinas Eish Yud. So Ish is fire with the letter Yud. Isha is fire with the letter Hey, Malchus. So Isha, Eish Hey, is yearning, Malchus is yearning to connect with Eish Yud. The Hey is yearning to connect like a fire with the Yud. So you have Yud K together. V'Hashem zeh nikra Hatzama. Why does it say Hatzama with a Hey? B'chinas Hey Tzama. U'mishtekekes le'b'chinas Yud. The Hey of Malchus is Tzama, is thirsty, and yearning to the level of Yud. The Hey of Hashem, Yud K, is yearning to connect to the Yud. Okay. Now, I want to just stop for a moment. You could ask a very obvious question. How did the Rebbe Rashab suddenly get into a whole new subject here, which doesn't seem directly connected to what we're learning? So first of all, he's going to connect it, as you can imagine. But remember, Ayin Beis, and something I pointed out a number of times, Ayin Beis is not a single mimer. It's here just in end of volume 2, it's going to be 144 mimar, Ayin Beis. So the fact of the matter is that Rebbe Rashab is tying together many, many different subjects of Chassidus. They all come together in this hemshech. So besides covering the subject matter itself, the Rebbe Rashab is also demonstrating how you find it in every sugya, in every possible scenario area of Torah and Chassidus. That's number one. Number two, as we're going to learn this, you'll see that this is going to add understanding to what we learned till now. And in many ways, going to be even clearer because it's avoidadik. It's going to explain the avoida. Because remember, never forget, as I always point out, the connecting lines. The whole thing is beginning to, in order to be mamshel de'era bligvul, we need techachas musar, derech chaim techachas musar. And what is that? Liyased atzmei. And he's now going to speak. In other words, it's about healing. It's about repairing. It's not enough just to do everything right. In a case where something is broken or something is destroyed, or desecrated, in this case, you're going to come to Havayu Elikim, the highest levels of Elikus and Bli Gvul, through this Techachas Musar. That's the flow here. But to do this effectively and thoroughly, the Rebbe Rashab goes into the details. Because the story is all about the Mizbeach. It's not just in general. It was they desecrated and they destroyed the Beis the Mizbeach. So he wants to explain what a Mizbeach is. A Mizbeach in its best scenario is Malchus yearning for Elikus. They came and destroyed that, the yearning. And Eliyahu came and corrected it and healed it, as we're going to learn. And through the miracles, caused the Jews to inspire them. They should correct their ways. And that's when they said Havayu Elikim. So this is what the Rebbe Rashab is explaining, that the Havayu Elikim is that we've been learning about is now in this highest level going to be Mamshech Havaya, the Le'ela of, like he said, that's even higher than the Havaya and Torah mitzvahs. That's the direction he's going here. So just keep that in mind, and it's definitely going to get back to the subject matter, but he's now going into this more specific story and episode, which really, if you go back, if you see on page 1190, when he started the whole subject, he said, Va'inyanhu, to understand, v'yadaita Ayin, on a deeper level, when he started the beginning of the Maimer, in other words, what is Shemayim Mimal V'Aretz Mitachas, the two explain the two elements. So till now, we've learned it's Eir HaGvul and Eir HaBligvul. In the previous Maimer, we learned that it's to negate duality, that the divine godliness is in the physical mitzvahs in this world. Now he's introducing more to explain how do you draw down this Eir HaBligvul. Because existence, remember, is defined by Gvul. How do we suddenly get to Eir HaBligvul? Eir HaBligvul is completely on God's terms. We are Gvul. And remember, we're looking to transform the tzimtzum, not just to get the finite energy, but also the infinite energy from before the tzimtzum. So how do you really do that? So till now, we assumed that Avedas Adam, a human being, which is Adam, remember, Ubara Adam al Kula, that the human being, which is higher than Shemayim Mal Aretz Mitachas, has the power to draw down. But more specifically, what we're going to see here is when we transform in our own lives, our cheshach, which is our animal soul, which is offered on the Mizbeach. When we transform our animal soul, that means we're transforming our tzimtzum within us. We don't just reach the pinnacle of finite energy, we also have the power to draw the infinite energy, which is beyond existence, is ultimately what he's going to be saying here. So, I just wanted to pause and just put it into that context. And that's why I began by Inyanhu, that sometimes it says twice Havayu Elikim. By Matan Torah it was only once. By Eliyahu now is twice. And now he's explaining, first he explained the two, Shemayim Mal V'Aretz Mitachas. Now he's continuing here. So now we know that Malchus, a Mizbeach, is essentially a state of Malchus, and the flame on the Mizbeach is the Gvuras, the Hey Gvuras, like a flame yearns, right? What does a flame do? Opposite of water. Water descends from the top down. A flame goes upward. It's licking the air. It's yearning, like the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Yutes in Tanya, that a neshama, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, a neshama is like a flame. What is a flame? A flame is looking to get to its source. Same thing here, the Eish, the fire of the Mizbeach is always looking to connect to the Yud K. Isha, Ish, Yud K. And that's Elishach Chukosach.
Rabbi, previously we had said that when it said the bara adam al kulo and the derech of accomplishing the shiluv in both ways was, I think, primarily we said b'torah mitzvahs, and here he seems to be saying that the ultimate method of doing that is this tochachas musar. Now, I'm imagining it's all three ultimately, but in terms of a priority, it seems like he's switching a bit from external actions, if you will, things learning Torah. Of course, we imbue it, but it's something we're focusing on Torah mitzvahs, which is to some extent focusing outwardly, and Tochachas Musar is obviously focused internally.
First of all, we're just beginning the subject matter, so it's a little premature to ask anything until we see everything the Rebbe Rashab will say. That's number one. Number two, that would be like asking, we know tshuva is greater, Baal tshuva is higher than a tzaddik. So we're going to negate the tzaddik's Torah and mitzvahs because tshuva has a quality that a tzaddik doesn't have. So point being is, we're middle of the subject, we're just beginning it, and there's no reason to come to any conclusions right now. He's just beginning the subject matter, and let's see where it goes, and he'll explain it. If you go back to the pages I refer to, already deduced from there the concept, but the bottom line is we've been going all the time, going from the bottom up. We started with finite energy within existence. We moved to premise of the finite energy. We moved to Erablikvul. There's more to come, a lot more to come. So just be patient. You'll get it. It'll become all clear.
Okie dokie.
Okay.
What is the Hatzmeyo? Al Shem Zen Nikris Hatzmeyo.
What do you mean? Hatzmeya is referring to the thirst. What's the hay?
Yeah, but where is it taken from?
Where's the word Hatzmeya come from?
Yeah.
I'll show you. Go back. The whole discussion earlier about it. It's a pasuk. It's explained in Kuntur Samayin at length, and also earlier in Ayin Beis.
Here's a pasuk. Sfois horovo esatzmeyo.
That's the pasuk.
Is he referring to that?
Absolutely.
In Dvorim.
Yeah, and I'm showing. I want to show you where it is. In earlier in Ayin Beis. Look on page 1023, Aleph Chav Gimel.
Is this connected to what's it called? Kuntrus Ayin? Svais Harav Atzmeya?
It's connected to what?
Kuntrus Ayin.
I just said it's explained in Kuntur Samayin, the fifth Maimer and on, yes.
Okay.
But it's also explained here. Look, you look at Aleph Chav Gimel. Are you looking?
Aleph Chav Gimel. Al Shem Zen Nikris Prince Malchus Tzmeya. K'meish Kosev Aman Sfeis Harav Atzmeya. U'Pirish Rashi b'Sanhedrin. Atzmeya zu Knesset Yisrael she Tzmeya leYoitzo. U'Lemaylo b'Chinas Malchus. You
don't need to read it. You can all read it. That's exactly.
He's explaining it here very clear.
Oh, it's helpful for me because I don't have the book.
I'm showing you where it is in Ayin Beis. And not only that, what he's going to say here is connected to that, because just to make the plot thicken a bit, if you recall that the three levels we spoke about in Shabbos, he says there's three levels of Rotzeh. Three levels of Rotzeh. So that's why Rotzeh is so prominent here, because it's the Rotzeh. Remember the word Rotzeh we used earlier? Look on page 1190. He said, so the concept of Rotzeh is coming back into action here. And if you want to know where that's discussed more at length, look at page, the three levels of Rotzeh. Where's that? I'll find it you 1 second. Since we're already on the topic, might as well connect everything here already. It's later, sorry. You may recall the whole thing of Ayidaita Hayoim. Hayoim was Rotze and Shuv, was Yom and Laila, right? The Tzimtzum creates a summer, a thirst, a Rotze. Rotze and Shuv was Yom and Laila, and that was about transforming the Tzimtzum, the Yom, the Ayidaita Hayom. So that's number one. And number two, look at page, hold on. And then when he spoke about Shabbos and weekdays, if you recall, weekdays was summer, was a Rotze, and Shabbos was Shuv, or the opposite, I'm sorry. No. Weekdays was Shuv and Shabbos was Rotze, I think. Yeah.
Not the opposite? That weakness is Ratzai?
I'll look in 1 second. I'll give you 1 second. Here. If you look on page 1129, there he talks about the 3 levels of Rotze. Yeah. I'm already looking at all these sources. I might as well look it all up already here. Let me see. Well, the Rotze actually began a lot earlier. Malchus. Yeah, on page 10:15, Aleph Tezvav began the discussion of Rotze. Shabbos and weekdays began. Wow. I might as well get all the Marmikamis out. Yeah. Yeah, Shabbos and weekdays began on page 1039. There he says, let me see.
In Aleph Tesvav, he's talking about the Ratzai V'Shuv.
Anyway, yeah, that's where he starts the whole subject matter that I just said.
So it's the hay of the isha is mishtakek to the yud in the ish.
Yeah.
And how does that work out in Hashem's name?
Yud K, what do you mean?
So say the yud comes before the hay.
The hay is mistake to the Yud.
Okay, so so I'm just asking it should be the chayret should be the opposite way around. The yud should
Why?
come before the hay.
The Yud goes down, then there's a hay, and the hay is looking to connect to the Yud above it. Okay. We'll stop here anyway. So
One more question for you.
we're going to
If you
continue.
want-
No, but you never said, you clarified which is Rosh and which is Shuv, Shabbos or weekday.
It looks like the days is Rosh, Shabbos, is Shuv.
Yeah, because it talks about Oneg Shabbos on page 1039.
Well, it's more than just 1039. It's all the pages there. Yeah, I'm almost sure that's what it is. Well, yeah. Okay, we'll stop here, middle of page 1192. We're in the middle of the discussion of the Aish. He's going to talk about it more now. Of course, we're going to go into more detail. Aish Hashem, Aish Hey, and Aish Yud. Okay, so middle of
Rabbi,
page